The year is roughly 230 BC. Rome is feeling absolutely fantastic about itself. They had just finished pummeling Carthage in the First Punic War, seizing Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. The Republic was basically the high school quarterback who just won the state championship and is now assuming everyone else in the cafeteria is going to give him their lunch money. Rome controlled the Tyrrhenian Sea, and they assumed the rest of the Mediterranean would just naturally respect their personal space. But just around the heel of Italy's boot in the Adriatic Sea, things were less civilized. While Rome was busy high-fiving itself, the Illyrians, specifically the Ardeaii tribe, were building a surprisingly robust business model based entirely on Grand Theft Auto, Boat Edition. Under King Agron, the Illyrians had united various tribes and turned piracy from a hobby into a state-sponsored industry. These weren't just raggedy guys with peg legs and parrots. The Illyrians used small, agile warships called lembi. These things were the Ferraris of the ancient world. No cargo space, no bathrooms, just 50 guys with oars and bad intentions. They could outrun heavy merchant ships, swarm them, steal the wine and pottery, and be back home in time for dinner. For a while, Rome tried to ignore it. They were tired. War is expensive, and honestly, most of the people getting robbed were Greek merchants or Southern Italians who technically weren't Roman citizens yet. So, the Roman Senate adopted their favorite foreign policy strategy: aggressive indifference. "Oh, you got robbed by pirates? That's crazy," the senator says, sipping wine. "Have you tried simply not sailing in the Adriatic? Just a thought." But as the Illyrians got richer, they got bolder. King Agron began attacking cities aligned with Rome and disrupting the grain supply. And if there is one thing you do not do, it is mess with a Roman's carb intake. The Adriatic was turning into a lawless highway, and the new sheriff was about to realize he couldn't stay on his coffee break forever. In 231 BC, King Agron scored a massive victory against the Aetolians. Naturally, he decided to celebrate in the most traditional way possible, by drinking enough unwatered wine to kill a horse. Agron died of pleurisy, read partying too hard, leaving the throne to his infant son, Pinus. Obviously, babies are terrible at naval strategy, so Agron's widow, Queen Teuta, took over as regent. And if the Romans thought a woman might be more diplomatic, they were about to get a very rude awakening. Teuta was not interested in peace, she was interested in profit. She essentially told her navy, "Go forth and steal everything that isn't nailed down. Actually, take the nails too." The Illyrian fleet swarmed south, attacking Elis, Messenia, and capturing the wealthy city of Phoenix. They were disrupting trade routes so badly that Italian merchants were now literally banging on the doors of the Roman Senate, waving receipts for stolen goods. Finally, the Senate sighed, put down their grapes, and decided to send a diplomatic mission. They dispatched two brothers, Gaius and Lucius Coruncanius, to Teuta's court in Scodra. Their mission: deliver a sternly worded verbal warning. The meeting did not go well. The Romans demanded Teuta put a leash on her pirates. Teuta, lounging on her throne and looking bored out of her mind, replied with the ancient equivalent of, "Not my problem." She explained that, according to Illyrian law, piracy was a legitimate private business, and royalty didn't interfere with private enterprise. It was the libertarian dream, just with more stabbing. Lucius Coruncanius, the younger and hot-headier brother, decided this was the perfect moment for some sass. He told the queen that Rome had an excellent legal system for fixing private enterprise and that they would force her to reform. It was a bold move. Let's see how that pays off for him. Teuta, to her credit, didn't kill Lucius right there in the throne room. That would be rude. Instead, she waited until the Romans had packed their bags, checked out of the hotel, and were on the boat ride home. She was absolutely seething. In her mind, she was the queen of the Adriatic, and some guy in a bedsheet had just mansplained international law to her in front of her employees. It was unacceptable. As the ambassador's ship was sailing back across the Adriatic, Illyrian operatives, let's call them independent contractors, intercepted the vessel. In a move that shocked absolutely everyone who wasn't paying attention, they assassinated Lucius Coruncanius. This was a colossal blunder. In the ancient world, ambassadors were like referees. You might hate them, you might scream at them, but you absolutely do not kill them. It was a violation of the Jus Gentium, the law of nations. By killing an envoy, Teuta had essentially just walked into the Roman Senate and slapped every single member in the face with a wet fish. When news reached Rome, the Senate didn't just get mad, they went cold. The aggressive indifference evaporated instantly. The Senate voted unanimously for war. They weren't going to send a police boat, they were going to send the apocalypse. Both consuls for 229 BC, Gnaeus Fulvius Centimillus and Lucius Postumius Albinus, were mobilized. Teuta thought she was dealing with a local dispute. She didn't realize she had just activated the military-industrial complex of the Mediterranean's biggest bully. Rome prepared a fleet of 200 quinqueremes and 20,000 troops. To put that in perspective, that's like calling in a tactical airstrike to deal with a noisy neighbor. In 229 BC, the Roman fleet under consul Gnaeus Fulvius Centimillus launched. 200 state-of-the-art warships cut through the waves. That is a truly insane amount of firepower for a police action. It's like sending the entire Avengers roster to catch a guy who stole a candy bar. Their first stop, the strategic island of Corcyra, modern-day Corfu. Teuta had recently captured the island and left it under the command of her top general, a guy named Demetrius of Pharos. Now, remember that name, because Demetrius is the Starscream of ancient history, competent, ambitious, and absolutely not to be trusted. Demetrius was a math guy. He looked at his few dozen Illyrian lembi, then he looked at the 200 Roman heavyweights approaching. He did the calculation. Option A, fight Rome, die immediately, be forgotten. Option B, betray Teuta, get rich, live to party another day. It wasn't a hard choice. Demetrius didn't just surrender, he practically rolled out the red carpet. He handed the citadel over to the Romans before they even knocked. The Romans were delighted. Not only did they secure a major base without scratching their armor, but they also gained a guide who knew exactly where Teuta hid her loot. Demetrius hopped aboard the Roman flagship, pointed toward the mainland and said, "She's that way. Also, she called your mom ugly." With Corcyra secure, the Roman land army under consul Postumius arrived from Brundisium, 20,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry. They linked up with the fleet and Demetrius. The Teuta takedown team was fully assembled, and the queen, currently busy besieging the city of Epidamnus, had absolutely no idea the hammer was about to drop. With Demetrius now officially the world's worst tour guide, the Romans turned their eyes toward the mainland. The city of Epidamnus was currently under siege by Teuta's forces. The pirates were having a grand old time, throwing rocks at the walls and likely debating how to spend their future plunder on fancy eye patches. Then, the horizon changed. The Roman fleet swept in like a hurricane made of wood and angry Italians. The Illyrian besiegers didn't even try to fight. They took one look at the armada, realized they had left the stove on back home, and scattered in every direction. Epidamnus was saved without the Romans, barely breaking a sweat. Consul Fulvius landed the army, and the Conquest Express began its march north. It turns out, when you show up with 20,000 heavy infantry, making friends is really easy. The local tribes, the Partheni and the Atintanes, saw the legions marching in perfect step and immediately decided they had always been huge fans of Roman foreign policy. The Romans accepted their surrender and their grain and kept moving. Next stop, the island of Issa, which was also being besieged by Teuta's goons. Once again, the Romans pulled the "look at how many of us there are" maneuver. The Illyrians at Issa panicked. Some fled to the mainland, while others surrendered so fast they pulled muscles in their shoulders, raising their hands. The entire coastline was flipping allegiance faster than a politician during election season. Rome was effectively playing Pac-Man with the Illyrian map, gobbling up cities and spitting out garrisons. And poor Queen Teuta? She was about to realize that her private enterprise was facing a hostile takeover. By the end of the summer, Queen Teuta's Empire of the Sea had been reduced to a single, angry woman hiding in a box. With the Romans controlling the entire coastline, the major ports, and the islands, Teuta realized she had played a game of chicken with a freight train. She abandoned her capital at Scodra and fled to the fortified town of Rhizon, modern-day Rison. Rhizon was well situated. It was tucked deep inside the Bay of Kotor, far from the open sea and heavily defended. It was essentially the ancient equivalent of a doomsday bunker. Teuta huddled inside, waiting for the Roman legions to come banging on the door. But the Romans didn't come. Consul Fulvius and Postumius looked at the map. They looked at the rugged, mountainous terrain leading to Rhizon. Then they looked at their nice, comfortable ships filled with looted Illyrian wine. Rome had already accomplished the mission. They had secured the trade routes, humiliated the pirates, and liberated the Greek cities. Dragging 20,000 men up a mountain just to arrest one queen seemed like unnecessary cardio. Instead, they left a massive garrison in the capital, Skodra, handed the keys of the region to their new best friend Demetrius, and called it a successful season. As winter approached, the consuls sailed back to Italy, leaving Teuta to sit in her fortress and think about what she had done. It was the ultimate ghosting. Spring of 228 BC rolled around, the snow melted, the flowers bloomed, and Queen Teuta finally accepted that her career as a pirate lord was officially over. Hiding in her fortress of Rhizon was safe, sure, but it was also incredibly boring. There were only so many times you could rearrange the furniture or yell at the wall. Realizing that Rome had effectively blocked her from doing, well, anything, she decided to swallow her pride, which was a very large pill, and send envoys to Rome to sue for peace. The treaty negotiation was less of a negotiation and more of a list of demands dictated by a very angry landlord. The Romans brought out the paperwork, and the terms were brutal. First, Teuta had to pay a massive annual tribute to Rome. Essentially, she was being fined for the crime of existing. Second, she had to give up almost all of Illyria. Third, and this was the kicker, she was forced to agree to a strict naval restriction. No more than 2 Illyrian ships could sail south of the city of Lissus at any one time. And just to rub salt in the wound, those 2 ships were not allowed to be armed. This clause effectively castrated the Illyrian navy. It turned the terrifying pirates of the Adriatic into a couple of guys in a canoe. Teuta signed the treaty. She had no choice. Rome had effectively turned Illyria from a terrifying predator into a defanged, declawed, and neutered house cat. The pirate queen was allowed to keep her tiny district around Rhizon, but she was now politically irrelevant. Meanwhile, the Romans looked at their new map. They had cleaned the seas. But there was one loose end they needed to tie up, or rather, reward. With Teuta humiliated and the Adriatic secure, Rome decided to engage in their favorite pastime, outsourcing. They didn't want to actually govern Illyria. That involves taxes, infrastructure, and listening to locals complain about potholes. Gross. Instead, they handed the keys to the kingdom to their star trader, Demetrius of Pharos. Rome made Demetrius a client king. It's basically a middle management position where you get to wear a crown, but Rome still owns your soul. They gave him control over most of Teuta's old territory, patted him on the head, and said, "Good boy, now don't do anything illegal while we're gone." The Romans sailed home through a massive triumph, essentially a parade with better catering, and congratulated themselves on solving the piracy problem forever. They turned their attention to other pressing matters, like the Gauls invading from the north and a certain Hannibal Barca starting to make noise in Spain. But here is the problem with installing a traitor as your king. He is, by definition, a traitor. As soon as Rome turned its back to deal with the Celts, Demetrius looked at the No Piracy Treaty, laughed, and used it as a coaster for his beer. He figured Rome was too distracted to notice a little light treason. Demetrius didn't just break the rules, he shattered them. He married Teuta, the mother of the infant King Pinus, consolidating his power. Then he started building ships, lots of ships, way more than the 2 unarmed dinghies allowed by the treaty. He allied with the Histrians and started raiding Roman supply lines again. He basically looked at Teuta's failed business model and said, "I can do it better." He was betting that Rome was too busy fighting the Gauls to care about the Adriatic. It was a calculated risk. Unfortunately for him, the Romans were essentially the world champions of multitasking violence. It was 219 BC. Demetrius of Pharos was feeling pretty good. He knew Rome was terrified of the rising threat in Spain, a guy named Hannibal was currently making a lot of noise, and he figured the Senate was too busy wetting their togas to worry about a few pirates in the Adriatic. He was wrong. Rome operates on a strict policy of zero tolerance for backstabbing weasels. The Senate decided they needed to clean up the backyard before the big storm hit. They dispatched Consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a man who did not believe in jokes, hobbies, or smiling, to deal with Demetrius. Demetrius had prepared for this. He garrisoned his troops in the fortress city of Demeli, which was famous for being impregnable. He boasted that it could withstand a siege for years. Paulus took it in 7 days. With his invincible fortress gone, Demetrius fled to his home base on the island of Pharos. He felt safe there. The city had high walls, a strong harbor, and he had 6,000 elite troops. He prepared for a long, grueling standoff. But Paulus didn't have time for a standoff. He had a war with Carthage to get to. So, he pulled the oldest trick in the book. The Roman fleet sailed up to the harbor in broad daylight, made a bunch of noise, and then pretended to run away in panic. Demetrius, eager for glory, opened the gates and led his army down to the beach to chase them. "Get them!" he screamed. "They're retreating! We're winning!" Meanwhile, Paulus had hidden his entire heavy infantry in the woods behind the city the night before. When Demetrius turned around to see Roman flags flying from his own towers, he realized he had fallen for the military equivalent of, "Hey, look, a bird!" Demetrius was now trapped between the Roman fleet in his harbor and the Roman legions in his city. Most generals would stand and fight to the death. Demetrius, however, was a professional weasel. He took one look at the slaughter, grabbed his emergency bag of gold, and sprinted for a secret cove on the other side of the island. He managed to escape on a single ship, abandoning his kingdom, his army, and his dignity. But he didn't just disappear. He fled to the court of King Philip V of Macedon. There, he spent the rest of his life acting like the devil on Philip's shoulder, constantly whispering, "You know who sucks? Rome. You should totally fight them." This would eventually cause the Macedonian Wars, proving that Demetrius was the gift that kept on giving, if the gift was herpes. Back in Illyria, Consul Paulus finished leveling Pharos to the ground. He returned to Rome in 219 BC to celebrate a spectacular triumph. The Senate was ecstatic. The Adriatic was secure, the pirates were crushed, and the seas were safe for Roman trade. They had cleaned the house just in time, because while the Romans were busy high-fiving each other over beating some pirates, a messenger arrived from the west. A certain Carthaginian general had just left New Carthage. He wasn't bringing ships, he was bringing elephants, and he was heading for the Alps. Rome had won the pirate war, but they had merely cleared the stage for the main event.